"You're no good to me if you can't give me an heir," said my husband, the Mafia boss, before he left me. Years later, I came back with our twins. If you are new here, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. It's thanks to you that these stories continue to travel. Write in the comments from which part of the world you are listening. I love to know. I used to believe silence was peace, that if I could just escape the noise of him, the way his voice shattered me, the way his eyes undressed me, condemned me, abandoned me, I would find some kind of healing. I was wrong. Silence has a sound. It echoes. It hums at the base of your skull when the world is too still. It hisses between the pages of your thoughts, and it screams in your chest when you lie awake in the dark with two small bodies pressed against your own. My sons, mine, ours, they never knew the truth. Not really. They knew stories, half invented, half remembered, about a father who wasn't dead, but wasn't here. I told them he was far away, that he was protecting something. I never said what. I never told them I left, that I ran, that I fled with blood on my tongue and rage in my womb, and I never told them how I got the money. I just said I worked, that life is hard, that we fight for the things we love, that sometimes we run not because we're afraid, but because we're trying to save something that doesn't want to be saved. I was 26, broken in ways no one saw, beautiful in ways that stopped mattering. He told me I was useless, not with his fists, but with his mouth. His voice was worse. "You're no good to me if you can't give me an heir." Just like that. Flat, cold, final. He didn't yell. Nikolai didn't need to. He dismissed me like a servant, not a wife. Like I was a thing returned to sender. Defective. I didn't cry that night. Not until much later. Not until I realized I was late. Not until I stood in a stranger's bathroom, staring at two pink lines and wondering how the hell I was going to survive. I didn't survive. Not the way people mean. I became something else. A ghost. A myth. A mother. I gave birth to 2 lives in a hospital that never asked my name. I wrapped them in the only blanket I had and whispered promises I wasn't sure I could keep. They were perfect. They were proof that love had lived in me, even if just for a moment. And now, 7 years later, I feel him again, in the edges of sleep, in the wind that moves through our broken window, in the stranger's eyes at the corner market. Something's coming. Maybe it's him. Maybe it's death. Or maybe it's everything I thought I buried, clawing its way back to me, heartbeat by heartbeat, memory by memory, until I have no choice but to face the man who called me useless, and show him what I became without him. Or maybe, because of him. The first time I noticed the man in the market, I told myself he was nothing, just another face among the wandering, weather-worn strangers who passed through this edge of nowhere. But he wasn't. His eyes lingered too long on my sons, not with tenderness or warmth, but with calculation, like they were objects, variables, leverage. I kept my face neutral, my voice soft, asked the boys to go find fruit while I paid. My fingers trembled around the coins, and I hated that they did. I hadn't felt fear like that in years, not since the night I disappeared, not since I crossed a frozen border in silence, blood soaking into the inside of my coat, the taste of goodbye still burning in my mouth. It had taken me months to forget the sound of his breath in the dark, years to stop expecting him in the mirror behind me, and now, with one stranger's stare, it all came rushing back, like I'd never left. That night, after I tucked the boys into the thin bed we all shared, I didn't sleep. I listened. Every creak, every whisper of wind, every sigh of the floorboards felt like a warning. The house we lived in wasn't much. Wooden walls that leaked in winter, a door that didn't quite lock, one sink, 2 spoons, but it had been ours. Mine. I painted the window frames green. I grew herbs in old milk cartons. I made a life out of ashes. But something had shifted. Something old and sharp was crawling back toward me, and I could feel it under my skin like static. The next day, he was there again, by the well, pretending to talk to the local men, but glancing, always glancing, and my stomach dropped when I saw what he wore beneath his coat. A flash of black leather, an insignia I knew too well. A ring. His ring. Not Nikolai's. One of his captains. I felt the cold spread through my chest like frostbite. He'd found us. Or maybe he'd always known. My hands didn't shake this time. I walked past the man, past the fruit stalls and the dogs asleep in the dust, past the whispering women and the rusted cars. I walked until my lungs burned, until my feet bled, until I was in the hills behind our home, screaming into the silence. Why now? Why after all these years? What did he want? I thought I hated him. I wanted to hate him. It kept me sane. But a part of me, the part that never stopped remembering the warmth of his hands, the low rasp of his voice when he said my name in the dark, knew better. Nikolai didn't send men to reclaim what he threw away, unless what he threw away had become valuable again, unless I was never trash, unless I was always the most dangerous secret he had to protect. I pressed my hand against my belly, flat now, lifeless. But once it carried the empire he claimed not to want. Once it betrayed his words with truth. I went home. I packed a bag in silence. I told the boys we were going on a trip. They were excited. I smiled like I wasn't dying inside. I didn't know where we would go yet. I just knew we had to move. That night, as I sat in the doorway, watching the moonlight touch their sleeping faces, I realized something that hollowed me out. I couldn't run anymore. Not because I was tired, though I was. Not because I had nowhere left to go, though I didn't. But because a small voice inside me, steady, calm, cruel, whispered the truth. You don't want to run. You want to see him again. You want to look into his eyes and ask if it hurt. If letting you go tore him open, or if he slept like a king the night he shattered you. You want answers, closure, or revenge, maybe all three. I had no map, no plan, no allies. But I had resolve. And I had 2 sons whose eyes looked more like his every day. That was enough. We would leave at dawn. I'd stop hiding. I'd walk into the storm I tried to outrun. And if he was waiting, if Nikolai Ivanovich still sat on his throne of silence and blood, I'd face him not as the girl he discarded, but as the woman he unknowingly crowned the night he called her useless. The road out of the village was quiet that morning. Too quiet, like the world was holding its breath. The boys sat in the back of the car, their knees touching, whispering made-up stories to fill the silence I couldn't. I gripped the steering wheel with fingers that remembered too much, his hands over mine, showing me how to drive the armored black car in another life, the scent of gun oil and leather thick between us. I blinked it away. The mountains rose like shadows around us, beautiful and brutal. I didn't have a destination, just the certainty that if we stayed one more day, someone would come for them, or for me, and I didn't know which would be worse. My only plan was distance. I didn't cry when we passed the last road sign in a language I barely spoke. I didn't think about the life I was leaving behind. Our home, the cracked walls, the green window frames, the herbs on the windowsill, the nights wrapped around their small bodies whispering stories into the dark. I had nothing left but instinct and dread, and they were louder than memory. We drove until the sun rose fully and the hunger became too loud to ignore. I stopped in a village that looked like it had given up decades ago, all chipped paint and broken fences. I kept my hood low and my eyes lower. We ate bread and drank something sweet and hot, and I told them this was an adventure. I smiled. I lied. And then, as we walked back toward the car, it was there, folded under the wiper blade like a curse, a white envelope. No name, no handwriting, just the symbol I hadn't seen in 7 years. A serpent around a rose. My blood turned to ice. I didn't open it in front of them. I kissed their foreheads and told them to count cars in the lot. Inside the car, with the door shut and the air too still, I opened it with trembling hands. Inside was one line. Come home. Nothing else. No threat. No demand. Just a command. Simple. Absolute. His voice in my head said it. Low and calm, the way it always had. I stared at it for a long time. Not because I didn't know what it meant, but because I did. He knew where we were. He'd always known. There had never been a moment in these 7 years when I was lost to him. I'd been a ghost. Yes, but only in my own mind. To him, I was something else. A possession, a memory, a mistake, or maybe a wound that never healed. The message didn't frighten me. It enraged me. It woke something I thought had long since died. If he wanted me to come back, it was for a reason, and I would give him one. I would walk into his world with my sons at my side, and I would make him look at the pieces he broke. I would make him say it, say why, say everything, or burn in the silence he used to destroy me. The air changed as we crossed the final border. It was a scent I had tried to forget, but it clung to the back of my throat like smoke. Sharp, metallic, ancient. This was his land, his kingdom of iron and blood and quiet rules never written but always obeyed. I felt it in my bones before I saw anything familiar, as if my body still remembered how to brace for him. The boys had fallen asleep in the back seat, their heads tilted toward each other like mirrors, breath soft and even, innocent in a world that had never been. I envied them, their unknowing, their fragile trust. I should have taken them somewhere else, somewhere warmer, somewhere where their names could be different and their futures untouched. But it was too late for dreams, too late for pretending. The note was still in my pocket. I'd read it a dozen times and still felt the echo of his voice behind it. Come home. He never said please. He never needed to, but this wasn't a request. It wasn't even a warning. It was a summons, and some part of me, buried too deep for reason, had obeyed without hesitation. The gates appeared at dawn, black wrought iron laced with thorned roses. They hadn't changed. Neither had the stone walls behind them, or the way the morning mist curled around the statues like ghosts reluctant to leave. My hands clenched the steering wheel. I didn't breathe. I could have turned around. I could have vanished again, but I didn't. I pressed the button and the gates opened, slow and deliberate, like the inhale of a beast waiting to devour me whole. The drive was longer than I remembered, or maybe just heavier. Every tree lining the path knew me. Every bend carried the memory of another version of myself. The woman who once believed he could love her. The girl who thought passion could protect her from power. As we approached the main house, the sun touched the windows, and the light hit the same balcony where I'd once stood in nothing but his coat, watching the world burn below us. I parked but didn't move. My chest felt tight, my mouth dry. I turned to the boys, gently shook them awake. They blinked at me, sleepy and confused, and I smiled, tender, trembling. "Stay here," I whispered, "just for a moment." I stepped out alone. The gravel crunched under my boots like broken glass. The door was already open. Of course it was. He knew. He always knew. The hall inside was dim, silent, but nothing about it was empty. The scent hit me first. Cedarwood and spice and leather. The same cologne he always wore, as if time had never passed. My footsteps were soft, careful, deliberate. I didn't call his name. I wouldn't give him that. I walked past the grand staircase, past the oil paintings of dead men with cruel eyes, past the piano he once played for me when he thought I might still stay. And then I saw him, at the end of the hall, in the shadows, leaning against the door frame like he hadn't been waiting at all. He looked older, sharper, a little more ruin in his bones, but it was still him, that stillness, that weight, that unbearable magnetism wrapped in silence. His eyes locked on mine, and I didn't blink. He didn't speak. Neither did I. Not yet. There were no words that could carry the weight of 7 years, of exile, of sons he'd never touched. I let the silence stretch until it cracked, and then quietly, almost gently, I said the one thing I knew he couldn't ignore. "They're in the car." His jaw tightened, his eyes darkened, but still he didn't move. I took a step closer, then another, and when I was close enough to see the breath in his throat catch, I said the second thing I'd carried across every mile. "You lost the right to silence, Nikolai, so you will speak. You will tell me why." He didn't speak. Not at first. Just stood there, shoulders broad and still, eyes unreadable, like the weight of the world had settled into the silence between us and refused to move. I hated how my body remembered him, how my lungs adjusted to his presence without permission, how my skin seemed to lean forward, drawn by a gravity I swore I'd outgrown. I waited. I watched. The man who'd once held my heart like a loaded weapon now held my gaze like a confession he couldn't voice, and I wouldn't rescue him from it. Not this time. He shifted, slowly, deliberately, like someone waking from a long, violent dream. His mouth parted, then closed again. And then finally, that voice, low, rough, devastating, broke the air between us. "I knew you'd come back." 4 words, 4 needles under my ribs. "I didn't," I replied, my voice soft but sharper than his. "And yet you're here." He stepped forward just once, and I held my ground. "You left me with no choice," I said. "You summoned me like I was still yours." His jaw twitched. He looked down, then up again, and I hated that flicker of pain in his eyes. It didn't belong to a monster. It belonged to a man, and I needed him to be the former, or everything I'd done to survive would lose its meaning. "I never stopped watching," he murmured. "I knew where you were, every day, every hour." My breath hitched, but I didn't let him see it. "So you were spying on us?" "No," he said. "I was protecting what was mine. I was never yours, not after what you said to me. That was the only way you'd leave," he said. And this time the words didn't cut like cruelty. They cut like grief. I turned away, walked toward the grand window that overlooked the courtyard where the boys now sat in the car, their faces barely visible through the windshield. I pressed a hand to the cold glass. "You could have told me," I whispered. "You could have let me stay. If you stayed, they would have died," he said, his voice behind me now, closer, darker. "And you, they would have taken you from me in pieces." I turned slowly, the words like fire behind my eyes. "So you took me apart first?" He exhaled sharply, closing the distance between us without touching me. "I needed you to hate me. It was the only way you'd run far enough." I wanted to scream, to weep, to slap him across the mouth and then fall into it. But instead, I looked at the man who once promised forever and gave me silence, and I said the thing I hadn't let myself say in 7 years. They're yours, Nikolai. Both of them. He closed his eyes like the words pierced something soft, and when he opened them, they glistened, not with tears, but with something rawer. Reverence. I know, he said. I knew before you did. My knees almost buckled. How? I had you followed that night. Not to harm you, to make sure you lived. I stared at him, heart pounding, throat tight. You let me steal from you. I gave you what you needed to survive. You made me think I won. You did. He took a slow step closer. You won your freedom. You won their lives. And now you're here. Alive. Whole. And they're here. Because I let you hate me long enough to save them. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. The pain, the betrayal, the twisted love of it all knotted in my chest like a storm that would never break. And then quietly, my voice trembling, I asked the one thing that terrified me more than anything else. Do they know? Not yet, he said, but they will, if you let me. I turned back to the window, watching the soft outlines of 2 small souls I'd fought the world to protect. I didn't answer. Not yet. I didn't forgive, but something inside me cracked, not with weakness, but with the unbearable ache of someone who'd been carrying the weight of truth alone for far too long. I should have walked away. I should have taken the boys and vanished into the night, left him standing there with his truths and his half-confessions, left him with the silence he once forced into me. But instead, I found myself leading him outside, my steps unsteady, my pulse wild, until the cold air of the courtyard cut into my lungs and steadied me. The car was still there, and so were they. Misha was awake, his small hand pressed against the glass, his eyes wide, cautious, protective already in a way a child should never be. Lev was curled against his brother, still asleep, his face soft and unguarded, a mirror of the man I both hated and couldn't stop aching for. I opened the door, forced a smile for them, the kind that mothers wear when they are trying to convince their children that the ground is not falling away beneath their feet. Boys, I whispered, my voice trembling only on the inside, this is someone you need to meet. Misha slid out first, wary but brave, the way he always was. Lev stirred, blinking, then followed, his smaller frame pressing instinctively into mine. I smoothed their hair, kissed their foreheads, and then I stepped back because I wanted him to see them in the light of morning, not as shadows or stolen memories, but as flesh, as blood, as destiny. Nikolai did not move at first. His hands stayed at his sides, his posture rigid, his eyes locked on the boys with a kind of reverence that was almost unbearable to witness. His chest rose slowly, his lips parting as though the sight alone carved through the armor he had carried all these years. Finally, he stepped forward, one measured movement, and his voice came low, steady, almost broken. Misha, Lev. The sound of their names on his tongue was enough to shatter me. I hadn't told him. I hadn't told anyone. Yet he spoke them as if he had whispered them every night in the dark, as if he had carried them like a prayer carved into his bones. Misha frowned, tilting his head, studying him with a suspicion far too old for 7 years. How do you know our names? He asked, his voice thin but sharp. Nikolai lowered himself, slow, deliberate, to meet his son's eyes. For a man who ruled with silence and fear, there was nothing but naked truth in his expression now. Because I have always known, he said softly. From the moment your mother carried you, I knew. I knew everything. Lev reached for my hand, and I gave it, my palm clammy, my heart slamming against my ribs. Misha looked back at me, his brow furrowed. Mama? The question in his eyes nearly broke me. Did you lie? Did you hide? Did you betray? I knelt down beside him, brushing my thumb across his cheek. I did what I had to do to keep you safe, I whispered. That's all I have ever done. And now you know who he is. Nikolai's jaw tightened at my words, but he said nothing. His eyes were still on them, like he was memorizing the shape of their faces, the sound of their breathing, the very proof of their existence. And then Lev, quiet, observant Lev, slipped free of my grip and stepped closer to him. He didn't speak. He just looked at him for a long, unbroken moment, then leaned forward and pressed his small hand against Nikolai's chest, right over his heart. Nikolai's breath caught. Mine too. The silence stretched, thick and unbearable, until finally Nikolai covered that small hand with his own, his eyes closing like he was touching salvation itself. When he opened them again, they found mine, sharp and unrelenting. They are mine, he said, but not with arrogance, with awe, with pain, with the desperate hunger of a man who had lost everything only to realize it had always been there, waiting. I wanted to scream, to run, to hold him, to collapse. But I did nothing. I simply stood in the cold morning, watching the man who had damned me claim the only parts of him I could never destroy, knowing that whatever came next, none of us would leave this place untouched. That night, the house felt alive again, though not with warmth. The walls carried whispers, the floors remembered footsteps, the air itself vibrated with a tension I could not tame. Misha refused to sleep until I lay beside him, his small hand gripping mine as if afraid I might vanish the way I once did. Lev slept easily, untroubled, as though something deep inside him recognized what my heart still refused to accept. I watched them breathe, their bodies stretched between mine, and I knew there was no escaping what waited beyond that door. Nikolai had not pressed, not yet. He had let the children fold themselves into me, had let me hold the fragile illusion that nothing had changed. But I could feel him in every corner of the house, in the rhythm of the silence, in the way my own blood seemed to thrum with the memory of his presence. When the boys' breaths evened into the cadence of dreams, I slipped from the bed and crossed the dark hall, barefoot, the wooden floor cool beneath me. His study door was open. It always had been a place of command, of sharp edges and iron decisions. Now it smelled of smoke and whiskey and something darker, something I couldn't name but that belonged only to him. He sat behind the desk, not in the shadows, but in the half-light of a single lamp, his jacket discarded, his shirt undone at the collar, his eyes fixed on a glass he hadn't lifted in some time. He didn't look surprised when I entered. He only looked at me, the way he always had, like I was both the wound and the cure. I closed the door, slowly, deliberately, and leaned against it because my knees did not trust me to stand without support. The silence stretched. He was waiting. He always made me speak first, and I hated that I still remembered the rhythm of his games. "They don't know," I whispered. "Not really. Not what you are. Not what I am." His gaze didn't falter. "They will. In time." I shook my head. "They're children. They deserve something better than this." His jaw tightened. "Better than truth?" My laugh was sharp, bitter, almost a sob. "Better than the life you gave me." For the first time, he flinched, just slightly. His fingers tightened around the glass, then released it. He leaned back, studying me with that relentless calm. "You think I wanted to hurt you." "You did hurt me," I said, my voice trembling with fury I had carried for too long. "You destroyed me. You made me hate myself for not being enough." "No," he said, his voice low, harsh, urgent. "I made you hate me because it was the only way to save you." My breath caught. He stood then, slow, deliberate, his height filling the room, his presence pressing against my skin like heat. He came around the desk, stopped just a step away, close enough that I could feel the warmth of him, smell the smoke on his breath, the leather in his skin. "If you stayed," he murmured, "you would be dead. They would have cut you open, torn the truth from your body, and taken what was mine. I couldn't let that happen, so I broke you, because breaking you was the only way to keep you whole." My eyes burned, my throat closed. I wanted to strike him, to wound him with words, but instead I whispered the only truth left inside me. "I hate you." His eyes darkened, softened, shattered. "I know," he said. And then, before I could stop myself, my hand lifted, pressing against his chest, feeling the steady thunder of the heart I had tried so long to erase. His breath hitched, sharp and raw, and in the space between that heartbeat and the next, all the years of rage and longing collapsed into something unbearable. I pulled my hand back, trembling, but he caught it, holding it against him, trapping me in the rhythm of his pulse. "Hate me," he whispered, his mouth so close I could feel the heat of it against my skin. "Hate me, Elena, but don't ever leave me again." And the sound of my name on his tongue broke me more completely than his silence ever had. I didn't pull away. I should have. My body told me to. My pride demanded it, but the years between us dissolved in that moment. His chest steady under my palm, his voice dragging me back into a darkness I swore I had escaped. His hand was warm, firm, unrelenting around mine, as though he feared I might vanish again if he let go. My throat ached with words I couldn't say, truths I didn't trust, memories that came too fast, too sharp, too cruel. I hated him. God, I hated him. And yet my body betrayed me, leaning into the heat of him, drinking in the scent I once called home. His eyes searched mine, not with arrogance, but with a hunger I hadn't seen before, a desperation that almost frightened me. He lowered his head slightly, his lips brushing so close to my ear I could feel the ghost of a kiss without the mercy of contact. 7 years, Elena, he murmured, his voice rough, uneven. 7 years I've breathed without you. Every night I wondered if you were alive, if you were safe, If the sons you carried still drew breath, do you know what it cost me to keep away? My knees weakened, my breath catching against the flood of his confession. I wanted to scream that it had cost me more, that I had bled, broken, starved, prayed, lied, all to keep the children alive while he remained here surrounded by stone and loyalty. But my voice failed me. Instead, I let the silence hang, thick, unbearable, until his forehead pressed against mine, and I could feel the raggedness of his breathing, the trembling restraint of a man who could destroy empires, yet trembled before the woman he once discarded. My fingers curled unconsciously into his shirt, pulling fabric between them like an anchor, and for a single moment, I let myself remember what it felt like to belong. His lips hovered, waiting, begging without words, and I almost surrendered, almost gave in to the storm that pulled at me with the same merciless force it always had. But then a sound split the air, a sharp knock, firm, echoing through the hall. I froze. He straightened, his hand tightening before releasing me, his eyes hardening back into the steel I remembered too well. The mask slid back into place, the softness buried beneath layers of control. "Stay here," he said quietly, and the command in his tone ignited the old rage inside me. I wanted to argue, to demand answers, but my voice was still lodged in my throat as he moved toward the door. I followed anyway, silent as shadow, and when he opened it, the man on the other side bowed his head but spoke with urgency. Russian words spilled out quickly, clipped and sharp, and though years had dulled my fluency, I caught enough. Intruders, movement near the borders, rumors of betrayal. My stomach tightened. The world I had left had not grown softer in my absence. It had only sharpened its teeth. Nikolai dismissed the man with a gesture and closed the door, turning back to me. His face was unreadable now, the tenderness gone, replaced by the cold fire of the leader I once feared. "It begins," he said, his voice low, certain. I swallowed, dread curling in my chest. "What begins?" He stepped closer, his shadow swallowing mine, the war for what belongs to me. His hand brushed against mine again, fleeting, almost unintentional, but the heat of it lingered, burning through the fragile armor I tried to rebuild. And in that moment, I understood with terrifying clarity. Whatever came for him, whatever storm threatened to break, it would come for me too. For us. For the children sleeping unaware in a room down the hall. I wanted to hate him enough to leave, to protect them by vanishing again into the corners of the earth. But I already knew I wouldn't, because the truth was colder, heavier, more damning. I could not survive another 7 years without knowing the whole of him, the darkness, the devotion, the unbearable love twisted into cruelty. And maybe, in some cruel symmetry, I no longer wanted to. The house never slept that night. Even when the corridors fell silent and the voices outside faded into distance, there was a weight pressing through the walls, a hum of violence waiting to erupt. I lay between my sons, their warmth pressed to either side of me, listening to their breathing, memorizing the rise and fall of their chests as if that rhythm alone could protect me from what waited. My eyes burned in the darkness, but sleep refused to come. Every time I closed them, I saw his face, too close, too raw, whispering truths I didn't want, and yet couldn't stop replaying. I hated that I believed him. I hated that part of me wanted to. When dawn came, pale and cold, I rose quietly, careful not to wake them, and found myself wandering down halls I had once walked as a wife and prisoner. The portraits stared at me with cruel, painted eyes, reminders of a dynasty built on blood. I should have felt like an intruder. Instead, I felt like a ghost returning to her own grave. His study door was ajar again. Inside, the lamp still burned from the night before, its glow spilling over papers, maps, letters that spoke of danger encroaching on all sides. And behind the desk, with his head bowed into his hands, was Nikolai. He didn't hear me at first. Or maybe he did, and simply didn't care. For once, he looked less like a king and more like a man undone, his shoulders heavy, his body bent forward as though the weight of everything he carried had finally cracked through the surface. I should have walked away, but I didn't. My voice betrayed me, soft, low, the same way it always had when I spoke to him in the stillness of night. "How long have you known?" He lifted his head slowly, his eyes finding mine with that same unbearable intensity. "Since the beginning," he said. "Since the night I sent you away." His voice was gravel, thick with exhaustion and something deeper, something that threatened to break me. I stepped inside, closing the door with a quiet click. "You could have told me." He shook his head, the faintest trace of a bitter smile on his lips. "And you would have stayed. You would never have left my side even if it killed you. You loved too fiercely, Elena. I had to wound you to save you." My chest ached, my breath shallow. "So you chose the kind of pain I couldn't forgive." "I chose the only pain you could survive," he answered, rising slowly, his movements deliberate, like he knew every step toward me was a risk I might not let him take. "And you did survive. You carried them. You raised them. You gave them life. Everything I could not do, you did. And now they are here. Because of you." His words cut through me, sharp as glass, and yet I found myself trembling not with fury, but with something far more dangerous, longing. My hands curled into fists at my sides, nails biting into skin as I forced the weakness away. "You watched us," I whispered. "All these years, you watched." He nodded once. "Every breath, every step, every night you thought you were alone." My throat tightened, tears stinging, fury and grief colliding in a storm I couldn't contain. "And you let me hate you." His gaze softened then, unbearably, devastatingly. "Better your hate than your blood on the floor." I broke then, not into sobs, not into words, but into silence so sharp it felt like a scream turned inward. He reached for me, slow, cautious, as though I might shatter if he touched me. His fingers brushed my arm, light as breath, and I didn't move away. The fire of his skin against mine was too much, too little, too late, and yet it burned through every wall I had built. "You think I don't know what I did to you," he said, his voice hoarse, "but I see it in your eyes every time you look at me. I ruined the only thing I ever loved. And still, Elena, I would ruin myself 1,000 times if it meant you lived." His words sank into me like poison and balm, twisting everything I thought I knew. And as the first light of morning spread across the floor, I realized with a hollow ache that the truth I had wanted for so long was more devastating than the lie I had carried. Because now I knew. He had never stopped loving me. He had only chosen the kind of love that destroyed us both. I should have left the room. I should have slammed the door, walked back to my children, reminded myself of the vows I made in the dark when no one was listening, that I would never let him touch me again, never let him pull me back into the fire I barely survived. But my body betrayed me the moment his fingers brushed mine, the smallest contact, enough to unlock every hunger I had buried under years of rage. My heart pounded so violently I thought it might break through my ribs. His eyes never left my face, waiting, daring, pleading without words, and I hated him more for the way he knew me, for the way he could still find the woman inside me who craved him no matter how hard I fought against it. I didn't speak, neither did he. The silence between us grew heavier, thick with things neither of us had the strength to say. And then he moved, one step, then another, until his body was almost flush against mine, the heat of him seeping through my thin nightdress, his breath feathering against my cheek. He raised a hand slowly, carefully, as though I might strike him down, and when his knuckles brushed the line of my jaw, I shivered like I had been starved of touch for a lifetime. Perhaps I had. I wanted to push him away. I wanted to claw his chest, scream, remind him of every night I wept alone with swollen ankles and trembling hands, of the terror I felt giving birth in a nameless hospital bed with no one to hold me. But the moment his thumb traced the corner of my mouth, the anger blurred into something else, something hotter, sharper, unbearable. My lips parted against my will. His name slipped out in a whisper, raw and broken. "Nikolai." It was enough. He seized my mouth with his. Not gentle, not patient, but desperate, devouring. A kiss forged of every year we had lost, every lie, every night of silence. My hands went to his chest to push him back, but instead they fisted in his shirt, dragging him closer, pulling him down into me until there was no air, no distance, no past, just him. His tongue slid against mine, tasting of whiskey and hunger, of promises broken and remade in a single breath. He kissed me like he was drowning, and I was the only shore. I kissed him like I was burning, and he was the only flame I wanted to consume me. He lifted me easily, carried me to the desk, scattering papers and maps as if they had never mattered. He set me down on the cold wood, spreading my legs with the certainty of a man who had never forgotten the shape of me. My hands tangled in his hair, tugging, clawing, desperate. I hated myself for the way I melted, for the way my body remembered him with perfect clarity, for the way pleasure surged through me even as my mind screamed that this was betrayal to every scar he left behind. His mouth left mine only to trail fire down my neck, across the hollow of my throat, to the curve of my breast. I gasped, the sound betraying me, betraying everything. His hand slid beneath my dress, firm against my thigh, moving higher, claiming territory he had once abandoned, but now returned to with a vengeance. I should have stopped him. I didn't. I wanted him to carve into me again, to remind me of the woman who had been lost in the shadows of exile. I wanted to feel alive. His breath was ragged, his voice hoarse when it came against my skin. "You hate me," he whispered. "Say it." "I hate you," I gasped, arching against him. "Say it again." "I hate you," I moaned, trembling as his mouth found mine again, bruising, consuming, relentless. "And I love you for it," he growled, his hands gripping me like I was both salvation and punishment. And in that moment, tangled in the ruin of his study, I knew the truth I had fought to deny. Hate and love were no longer separate things. They were the same fire, the same chain, the same unbearable need that bound me to him still. And no matter how many years had passed, no matter how many promises I had made to myself, I was his. Always had been, always would be. When the morning came, I thought the night might vanish like smoke, a fever dream that would dissolve under daylight. But it didn't. My body still throbbed with him. My lips still carried the taste of him. My skin still bore the imprint of hands that claimed and punished, loved and destroyed. I stood at the window of the old room that once belonged to me, staring out at the frost curling along the stone, at the soldiers moving like shadows across the grounds, and I realized with a sharp ache that nothing about this place had changed. Only I had. I should have felt shame. Instead, I felt a hollow calm, dangerous in its steadiness. Behind me, the bed was unmade, tangled sheets whispering the confession of what we had done. He was gone when I woke, as though he had dissolved into the night again, leaving me with silence. But this time the silence was heavier, filled with the echo of every word he didn't say. I dressed quickly, brushed my hair back, forced myself into the armor of control, and when I stepped into the hall, I found Misha waiting. His eyes were too sharp for a child, too knowing, as if he had heard ghosts moving through the walls while he slept. He didn't speak at first, just searched my face, and when he finally asked, "Are we safe here, Mama?" I couldn't lie. Not anymore. For now, I whispered, kneeling to smooth the hair from his forehead, my chest tight with guilt. He nodded, his jaw firming in a way that was all his father. Lev appeared then, rubbing sleep from his eyes, leaning against his brother without question. I gathered them both into my arms, holding them too tightly, as though I could fuse their hearts into mine and shield them from every shadow gathering outside these walls. That moment was stolen by a sharp knock. Not a servant's knock. Not cautious. Urgent. My blood chilled before the door even opened. Nikolai entered without waiting, his presence filling the room like a storm spilling through a window. His eyes swept over the boys, then me, and the air grew tense, expectant. "We leave tonight," he said, his voice low but unyielding. "The boarders are bleeding. They know you're here." My pulse spiked. "Who?" His gaze locked on mine, dark and merciless. "Everyone who wants what belongs to me." The words sank like ice through my spine. Misha clutched my hand, sensing the danger in his tone even if he didn't understand the words. Lev pressed closer, silent, wide-eyed. I wanted to demand answers, to rage against him for dragging us deeper into the fire, but there was no space for rage now. There was only fear. "You promised they were safe?" I whispered. He took one step closer, his hand brushing the small of my back as though to steady me, though it only set fire to my skin. "With me," he said, "always with me." I should have recoiled. Instead, I let his strength seep into me, against my will, because even as I hated it, I needed it. He turned then to the boys, crouching to meet their eyes, his face stripped of all the cruelty I knew, all the power he wielded. For them, he was only a man, raw, reverent. "You'll stay with me," he told them quietly, "and no one will touch you. No one." Misha studied him with the same suspicion he had shown before, but he didn't pull away. Lev, silent as always, leaned into him without hesitation. The sight struck me like a blade to the ribs, my son finding comfort in the man who had once destroyed me. Yet something inside me broke open at the same time, a hollow filling with warmth I had long buried. Nikolai rose, his hand brushing mine for only an instant as he passed, but the touch was enough to ignite every nerve in me again. "Be ready by nightfall," he said. "There is no going back after this." And then he was gone, leaving me trembling in the wreckage of choices I hadn't made, carrying the weight of truths I wasn't ready to speak. I pulled my children closer, burying my face in their hair, inhaling their innocence, their trust, and I whispered a prayer I didn't know I still had in me, that whatever war awaited us, whatever storm he had summoned, I would not lose them, not to him, not to anyone, not ever. The night fell too quickly, the sky heavy with clouds that refused to let the stars breathe. I dressed the boys in silence, layering them in dark clothes, boots too large for their feet, coats that swallowed their thin shoulders. Misha asked no questions, his eyes sharp, watchful, already carrying the burden of a man too young for its weight. Lev clung to my hand, quiet but alert, his gaze darting toward the door as though he could sense what waited on the other side. My hands shook as I tied the last buttons, but I kept my face steady. A mother cannot tremble when her children are learning how to stand in a world that has already chosen them as prey. When the knock came, I flinched. Nikolai entered, his presence filling the room before his voice even touched it. He wore black, his coat long, gloves tucked into one hand, his movements controlled, precise. His eyes landed on me first, then on them, softening in a way that twisted my chest. "It's time," he said simply, and though I wanted to fight, to scream, to tear the night apart with my refusal, I only nodded. There was no safety here. There was only movement, only shadows, only the desperate hope that running with him would keep the children breathing one more day. He led us through corridors lit only by the faint glow of lamps, his men waiting at every corner, silent, armed, eyes sharp. The boys walked close to me, their hands gripping mine, and I felt the thrum of my pulse echoing through them. Outside, the air was colder than I remembered, cutting through the fabric of my coat, biting at my throat. 3 cars waited beyond the gates, engines low, ready. He guided us to the middle one, opening the door himself, his hand brushing my back as I slid inside. The children pressed against me. He followed, and when the door shut, the world shrank to the sound of the engine and the steady rhythm of his breathing beside me. For miles we said nothing. The road was rough, the headlights slicing through the dark, and every shadow looked like a threat. My hand rested on Lev's hair, Misha's shoulder pressed against mine, and all I could think was how fragile they were, how easily this could end. Then the first gunshot split the night. The glass shattered before I even had time to scream. The car lurched, men shouting, metal twisting into chaos. Nikolai pulled me down, his body covering mine, his arms dragging the boys beneath him, the sound of bullets raining against steel deafening. I smelled blood before I felt it, sharp, metallic, thick in my throat. My ears rang, my chest burned, and all I could hear was Misha's voice, high and panicked, "Mama! Mama!" until it was muffled by Nikolai's command to stay down, to breathe, to not move. The car swerved, tires screaming until it finally stopped. The door ripped open, hands pulling, voices shouting in a language I knew but hadn't spoken in years. They dragged us out into the dirt, the boys clinging, sobbing, their small fists clutching my coat. Nikolai fought, 2 men barely holding him, his face a mask of rage, his voice a snarl that promised death. And I knew, in that instant, what choice I had. It wasn't reasoned. It wasn't planned. It came from the part of me that had carried them in my womb, that had built a life out of nothing, that had sworn I would never let anyone tear them from me again. One of the men raised his gun, the barrel glinting under the moon, aimed at Nikolai's chest. I didn't think. I moved. I threw myself forward, my body between them, my arms wrapping around him as if I could shield him with the very flesh he once discarded. The shot fired, the force tearing through me, the sound louder than anything I had ever heard. My knees buckled, his roar breaking the night as he caught me, dragging me against him, his hands already pressed to the wound, his voice shaking with a desperation I had never heard. The last thing I saw before the world blurred was Misha's face, white with shock, Lev's mouth open in a silent cry, and Nikolai's eyes, wild with terror, whispering my name over and over like a prayer he had no right to say. Elena, Elena, Elena. The pain was not sharp at first. It was heat, searing and spreading, a bloom of fire beneath my ribs that stole the air from my lungs. My body collapsed into his arms, weightless and heavy all at once, the world around me a blur of shouting, of engines, of footsteps on gravel. I could hear the boys screaming, their voices piercing through the ringing in my ears, but I could not lift my head to comfort them. My strength had already begun to drain, slipping from me like sand through broken fingers. Nikolai held me as though he could force life back into me with the ferocity of his grip. His hands pressed against the wound, his palms slick with my blood, his breath ragged as he whispered words I could barely catch. Not commands, not threats, prayers, promises, my name over and over again, spoken like it was the only language left to him. I tried to speak, to tell him not to let the boys see me like this, not to let them watch their mother bleed into the earth, but only a weak sound left my throat. His face lowered close to mine, his lips brushing against my temple, and for the first time I saw something I had never seen in him, not even in his quietest moments. Terror. Not the cold calculation of a man facing danger, not the fury of a king defending his throne. Pure, human terror, raw and unguarded, because he was losing me. The world tilted, shouts breaking into gunfire, the clash of men spilling into violence around us. His soldiers fought with the desperation of those who knew the price of failure, but I was only aware of his arms, his voice, the relentless pressure of his hands trying to keep me tethered to a life that was slipping further away. Somewhere in the chaos, I heard Misha's cry, high and frantic, calling my name, and Lev's smaller voice, softer but steady, calling for him, for his father. Nikolai lifted his head, bellowed an order so fierce it cut through the storm, and men obeyed without hesitation. The boys were pulled back, shielded, hidden, while he dragged me into the car, his movements frantic but precise, a man who could command death itself but could not accept mine. He laid me across the seat, his hands never leaving me, his eyes burning into mine as the engine roared to life. "Stay," he demanded, his voice breaking. "You hear me, Elena? You stay with me. You don't leave me now. You don't get to leave." I wanted to answer, to tell him I had stayed all along, even in absence, even in hate, even in the years I swore I had cut him from me. But my voice was gone, stolen by the weight pressing down inside me. His hand cupped my face, rough and trembling, his thumb brushing the corner of my mouth as if memorizing the shape of me before it was too late. "Look at me," he begged, and I did, even as my vision blurred, even as the world dimmed at the edges. His eyes held mine, anchoring me, and for the first time in all the years I had known him, I saw him not as the man who destroyed me, not as the king, not as the monster, but as the boy he must have once been, desperate to hold on to the only thing he had ever truly loved. The car lurched, speed pressing us into the seat, his voice a constant stream of promises, curses, confessions whispered against my hair. I felt the warmth of his mouth at my ear, at my forehead, at my lips, his kiss frantic and broken as though he could breathe life back into me through sheer will. "You're not leaving me," he whispered again, his words fierce and wet with the sound of grief. "Not like this. Not when I've just gotten you back." My eyes fluttered closed, exhaustion pulling me under, but his grip tightened, dragging me back, refusing to let me surrender. And as the world narrowed to the thundering rhythm of his heart beneath my cheek, I realized something cruel and tender all at once. I wasn't afraid, not of the dark, not of death, because even if this was the end, I had finally seen him stripped of everything, laid bare in a way no throne or crown could disguise. He loved me, and he was terrified of losing me. And for the first time, I believed him. The ride blurred into fragments, flashes of light tearing through the windows, the sound of engines roaring like thunder, men's voices cutting into one another as they shouted orders in the language of survival. My head rested against his chest, the steady thrum of his heart hammering against my ear as if it alone was willing me back from the edge. Every bump in the road jolted through me, fire ripping across the wound, but his hands never left me. One pressed down hard against the bleeding, the other cupped the side of my face, holding me to him as though he feared I would dissolve if he loosened his grip. He kept speaking, words tumbling out without hesitation, fierce and unrelenting. He told me I was stronger than this, that I wasn't allowed to leave him, that he had spent too many nights imagining this moment, only to lose me when he finally held me again. His voice cracked, broke, but he didn't stop, and somewhere in the haze I found myself clinging to the rhythm of it, to the sound of my name falling from his lips like prayer beads slipping through desperate fingers. I drifted, the darkness pulling at me, soft and heavy, but each time I tried to give in, his voice dragged me back, raw and unyielding. My hand trembled, searching for his, and when my fingers closed weakly over his wrist, his breath shuddered out like a man drowning who had finally found the surface. He pressed his mouth to my forehead, then my lips, his kisses frantic, wet with salt, tasting of both whiskey and tears. "Stay," he whispered again and again, as though the word itself could anchor me. I wanted to tell him that I was trying, that I was fighting, that I didn't want to leave my children to a world carved in blood, but the words tangled on my tongue, too heavy to push free. The car screeched to a halt. Hands pulled the door open, voices louder now, men shouting for stretchers, for doctors. He lifted me, his arms unyielding, carrying me as though I weighed nothing, his body curling around mine like a shield. I felt the night air against my skin, cold and sharp, and then I was inside, stone walls echoing with hurried footsteps, the smell of antiseptic mixing with the metallic scent of my blood. They tried to take me from him. I heard their voices, urgent, pleading, but he refused to let go. Only when the doctor raised his voice, firm and commanding, did he lay me down, but his hand never left mine. He stayed at my side, crouched low, his face inches from mine, his eyes blazing with terror and devotion as they cut into me, stitched me, fought to pull me back from the abyss. I screamed once, the sound raw, and his grip on my hand tightened until I thought my bones might break, his mouth pressing against my knuckles as he whispered that I was not alone, not anymore, not ever again. Hours slipped by in fragments, blurred and jagged. I woke to the sound of his voice, low and hoarse, telling someone to keep the boys away until it was over. I drifted again, pulled under by exhaustion, only to be pulled back by the brush of his lips at my temple, by the weight of his hand smoothing the hair from my damp forehead. I don't know how long it lasted. Only that when I finally opened my eyes fully, the room was quiet, the storm of voices gone, and he was there, sitting at the edge of the bed, still in the same clothes, blood dried across his shirt, his face hollow with sleeplessness. His eyes met mine instantly, as though he had never looked away, and the breath he released was so heavy it sounded like a man finally exhaling after holding it for years. He leaned down, pressed his forehead to mine, his voice trembling as he whispered, "You stayed." And though every part of me ached, though my body felt carved open and stitched together by trembling hands, I found myself answering with the faintest ghost of a smile. "For them," I whispered, my voice thin, breaking. "For you." His hand trembled as it slid against my cheek, his lips brushing mine with unbearable gentleness, and for the first time in 7 years, the silence between us wasn't filled with pain. It was filled with the fragile, impossible truth that maybe I wasn't lost to him after all. When I woke again, the light was softer, pale morning seeping through the high windows, and the world was quiet except for the steady rhythm of his breathing beside me. He hadn't moved. His body was still at the edge of the bed, one hand wrapped around mine, his head bowed as though he had kept vigil through every hour of the night. His clothes were the same, the blood still staining his shirt, but his grip on me had not loosened, as if letting go even in sleep would have risked losing me. For a moment I only watched him, the lines of exhaustion carved deep into his face, the shadows under his eyes, the way his chest rose and fell in uneven rhythm. He looked less like the man who ruled empires, and more like someone who had fought a war within himself and barely survived it. I traced his knuckles with my thumb, weak but deliberate, and his eyes opened instantly, sharp, alert, searching. Relief softened them when he saw me awake, and his lips parted like he had forgotten how to breathe until that moment. "Elena," he whispered, my name trembling out of him, not like a command, not like a claim, but like a plea. I tried to smile, though my body still ached, though the weight of what had happened pressed heavy against my chest. "You don't look like a king," I murmured, my voice thin. His mouth curved into the faintest shadow of a smile, but his eyes betrayed him. "I'm not," he said quietly, "not without you." The words hit me harder than the pain in my body. I turned my face into the pillow, tears burning my eyes because I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to. But years of silence and scars didn't vanish with a single confession. "You almost let me go," I whispered. "You almost let me die." He shifted closer, his forehead pressing against mine, his hand sliding up to cradle my face with a gentleness that broke me. "I almost lost you," he said. "And I swear to you, Elena, never again." His lips brushed mine then, slow, reverent, a kiss that carried more sorrow than hunger, though the hunger lived beneath it, waiting. I let him kiss me, let his warmth sink into me, because I couldn't fight it anymore. The truth was that I still loved him, in spite of everything, perhaps because of everything, and that love was the most dangerous weapon we had. The door creaked softly, and 2 small figures appeared, hesitant at the threshold. Misha's eyes went to me first, wide with fear, scanning my face as though searching for proof that I was still here. Lev clutched his brother's arm, his lower lip trembling, his body half hidden behind him. I lifted a hand, weak but steady, and beckoned them. They rushed forward, climbing onto the bed, careful but desperate, their small bodies pressing into me on either side. I wrapped my arms around them as best I could, pulling them close, breathing them in. Their warmth, their tears, their whispered "mama" filled the hollow inside me with something fierce and unshakable. Nikolai stayed at the edge, his eyes on them, on me, and I saw something shift in him. Not pride, not possession, something quieter, reverence. Lev crawled closer to him, uncertain but drawn, and when he reached out a small hand, Nikolai froze, as though afraid to touch something so fragile. But Lev pressed his hand into his, curling his tiny fingers around his father's, and Nikolai's face broke, his eyes closing, his shoulders trembling with the force of it. I watched him in that moment, the man who had once shattered me, undone by the simple trust of a child who carried his blood. And I realized that maybe redemption didn't come all at once. Maybe it came in moments like this, fragile and fleeting, stitched together until they formed something that could hold against the darkness. I pulled Misha closer, pressing my lips to his hair, whispering that we were safe, even though the truth was uncertain. And when I looked back at Nikolai, at the man holding our son's hand as if it was the only anchor left in the world, I let myself believe, if only for a heartbeat, that we could survive this, that love, as twisted and violent as ours, might still save us in the... The days that followed bled together, each one carrying the weight of a fragile truce between past and present. My body healed slowly, stitched back into itself by careful hands, but the wound inside me lingered, deeper than the scar hidden beneath the bandages. I spent hours lying still with the boys curled against, their warmth anchoring me, their laughter pulling me back when the shadows pressed too close. Yet even in their safety, I could feel the storm circling, the world outside sharpening its knives. Nikolai never left for long. When he did, he returned with blood on his cuffs, with eyes darker than midnight, with a silence that carried death in its breath. He spoke little of the war tightening around us, but I saw it in the way his men moved through the house, in the urgency of their whispers, in the weight of the glances cast toward me and the children. I knew the truth. We had become the center of his empire, not his wealth, not his throne, not the endless power he commanded. We were the weakness his enemies had waited for. And yet, when he came to me in the quiet of night, when the boys finally slept and the house exhaled its uneasy silence, there was no king in his touch, only a man. His hand would find mine, rough fingers threading between mine as though seeking absolution. Sometimes he would press his lips to my hair, his voice breaking with words I never thought he could say, that he had missed me, that he had broken himself by breaking me, that he had dreamed of our sons every night and woken to the emptiness of knowing they were out of reach. I wanted to resist, to guard the fragile pieces of myself that had taken years to rebuild, but his confessions seeped into me like water through cracks, slow, unstoppable. I hated the part of me that softened, the part that longed to forgive, the part that burned for him still. But hate and love had never been separate things for us. They were threads of the same rope, binding us tighter the harder we tried to pull free. One night, as I lay half asleep, I felt the mattress shift, his weight sinking beside me. I turned toward him, my body remembering before my mind caught up, and found his eyes waiting in the dark. He didn't speak. He didn't ask. He simply drew me against him, his hand pressing gently over the scar that had nearly taken me from him, as if to claim it as his, as much as mine. His mouth found mine, slow, deliberate, a kiss not of hunger but of surrender. And for the first time since I had returned, I let myself kiss him back without resistance, without rage, without the armor of hate. His breath shuddered, his hands trembling as they mapped the lines of me he thought he had lost forever. When he moved inside me, it was not conquest, not punishment, but something deeper, something that left me trembling, not with anger, but with the unbearable weight of being loved by a man who had destroyed me to save me. I cried silently against his shoulder, not from pain, but from the release of carrying too much for too long, and he held me as though my tears were his own. After, as dawn touched the windows, he whispered against my skin that there would be no more secrets, that I was no longer just the woman he had hidden away. I was his anchor, his shield, his queen. I wanted to laugh at the word, to tell him I had never asked to be crowned in blood, but his arms tightened around me, and I realized he wasn't offering me power. He was begging me to stay. In that fragile hour between night and morning, with his breath steady against my neck, and the boys safe in the room next door, I let myself believe him. I let myself believe that even in the heart of this darkness, even with enemies circling closer every day, we had built something untouchable. Not peace, not safety, but love. Twisted, scarred, unrelenting love. And maybe, for us, that was enough. The days grew heavier, marked by the rhythm of footsteps in the halls, by the echo of doors closing behind men who carried secrets and returned with blood. The boys noticed it too. Misha asked fewer questions, but his eyes followed every shadow, memorizing every sound, as though he already knew the world around him was sharpening into something merciless. Lev clung to me more often, silent, but when Nikolai entered the room his gaze followed him, wide, unblinking, as though he recognized a bond he couldn't yet name. I tried to shield them from the tension, but there are truths children can feel, even when no words are spoken. At night, When the house dimmed and the fires burned low, Nikolai would summon me. Not with words, not with orders, but with silence. I would find him in his office, the air thick with smoke and whiskey, his shirt undone at the throat, maps and documents scattered across the desk. His men waited outside, knowing better than to enter when I was there. He would look at me, just look, and it was enough. I would cross the room, my body betraying me as it always had, pulled toward him like the tide answering the moon. Sometimes he didn't speak at all. He would take my hand, guide me into his lap, bury his face in my neck and breathe me in like he was drowning. Other times he would press me against the desk, scattering papers with the urgency of a man who could not wait another moment, his kiss a fire that consumed every wall I tried to build. Our lovemaking was no longer a war, not punishment, not defiance. It was something darker, deeper, threaded with desperation. He touched me like he was carving himself back into me, and I let him, because the truth was that I needed it too. Every time he moved inside me, every time his lips claimed mine, every time his hands trembled against my skin, I felt the years of silence unravel, thread by thread. But outside those hours, the world pressed closer. One evening, I overheard two guards whispering in the corridor, their voices sharp with unease. They spoke of betrayal, of men inside our walls who had already been bought, of enemies gathering not far from the border. I felt the weight of their words settle in my chest, heavy as stone. Later, when I confronted him, his eyes did not waver. "They are coming," he said simply, pouring another glass of whiskey, but not drinking it. "They will not stop until they have you, until they have them." His gaze flicked toward the ceiling, toward the rooms where the boys slept. My stomach twisted. "Then why are we still here?" I asked, my voice breaking despite my effort to keep it steady. He looked at me, and in his eyes I saw the truth. "Because running will not save us this time. They will never stop chasing, and I will not spend another 7 years watching you vanish into the dark." His hand found mine across the desk, strong and steady, though his voice carried the weight of exhaustion. "We fight here. We end it here." I should have been terrified. I was. But there was something else too, something sharper than fear, a sense of inevitability, as though all the roads I had walked, all the nights I had endured, had led me to this moment. I nodded, silent, and his shoulders eased, though his eyes did not soften. That night, when he took me in his arms, his touch was fierce, unrelenting, his kiss bruising with a hunger that bordered on desperation. He held me like a man who knew the dawn might not come, who wanted to brand me into his skin, into his soul, before the storm arrived. I let him, because in that moment, love was not gentle. It was survival, and survival was all we had left. The tension in the house thickened until it felt like breathing smoke. The men moved differently now, their steps sharper, their eyes restless, their hands never straying far from their weapons. Even the air outside seemed charged, the silence of the woods broken by distant echoes that might have been wind, or might have been something else, something closer. The boys felt it too. Misha stayed close to me, his questions trapped in his throat, his gaze darting from face to face like he was piecing together a puzzle too heavy for his years. Lev grew quieter, watching everything, his small hand slipping into mine when he thought I might drift too far from him. At night, the weight pressed hardest. Nikolai and I sat together in the room that had once been a sanctuary and a prison, the fire burning low, shadows curling across the walls. He drank little, smoked less, his stillness louder than words. I wanted to ask what he was planning, what tomorrow would bring, but I already knew his answer: war. It was written in the set of his jaw, in the way his body never seemed to fully relax, even when his hands found me. That night he pulled me close, his mouth against my ear, his breath warm and trembling as he whispered that whatever happened, I was not to leave him again. His words were not request but vow, sealed against my skin with a kiss that tasted of both devotion and fear. I didn't argue. I only let him hold me tighter, my fingers curling into his shirt, because I couldn't bear the thought of another separation. Not now, not when the shadows were so close. Morning broke with the crack of gunfire in the distance, faint but undeniable. The sound carried through the walls, freezing the air inside the house. Nikolai was gone in an instant, orders spilling from his mouth, men scattering like shards of glass. I gathered the boys, pulling them into the farthest room, locking the door, pressing them into my arms as though my body alone could shield them from the storm building outside. Misha clung to me, his voice shaking as he whispered questions I couldn't answer, while Lev buried his face against my chest, his small fingers fisting the fabric of my dress. My heart pounded so violently I thought it might break free, but I held them tighter, murmuring promises I wasn't sure I could keep, words meant to soothe when my own terror threatened to drown me. The battle outside drew nearer. The sounds grew sharper. Metal striking metal, shouts, the stutter of machine fire. Each sound carried the weight of inevitability, of blood being spilled for names I wished my children had never inherited. And then, suddenly, the door burst open. Not Nikolai, not his men, strangers, faces twisted with violence, weapons raised. I pushed the boys behind me, my arms spread wide, my voice sharp and unyielding as I told them not to move. One of the men laughed, the sound hollow, cruel. He said something in Russian I hadn't heard in years, words that made my stomach twist. "Take the children. Kill her if you must." I lunged forward, every instinct inside me alive with fire, my hands striking, clawing, desperate. I didn't think of fear, of pain, of death. I thought only of Misha's eyes wide with terror, of Lev's small cry breaking through the chaos, of the life I had sworn to protect even if it meant spilling the last of my blood into the earth. A shot rang out. The sound ripped through the air, deafening, final. For a heartbeat, I thought it had found me, but instead the man in front of me crumpled, his weapon clattering to the floor. And behind him, framed in the doorway, stood Nikolai. His face was carved in stone, his eyes black with fury, the barrel of his gun smoking. He crossed the room in 3 strides, pulling me against him with one arm, dragging the boys into the other, his voice a snarl and a promise all at once as he spoke words meant for all of us, for the living and the dead. No one touches what is mine. And in that moment, pressed against his chest with our children between us, I realized the truth that had always been waiting. Love and war were no longer separate things. They were one, bound together, and we were bound inside them. And there was no turning back. The house weight of after. The walls vibrate the echo that still, the smell of smoke, the fabric of my body, my arms locked around. Nikolai's grip had not loosened either, his arm firm around my waist, his other hand cradling the back of Lev's head, his voice low, steady, a rhythm meant to anchor us all. But I felt the tension beneath his control, the storm raging inside him barely contained, every muscle taut with violence held at bay. The men outside dragged bodies into the mud, their boots heavy, their voices sharp, speaking of betrayal, of debts paid in blood, of names crossed from ledgers that would never be written. Misha watched with eyes too old for his years, silent but wide, and when he turned his face into me, I kissed his hair, whispering promises I wasn't sure belonged to this world anymore. We were taken back to the chamber where the fire still burned low, the room that had held both our silence and our sins, and Nikolai closed the door behind us with finality, as though sealing out everything beyond these walls. He set the boys down gently, his hand lingering on their shoulders, his eyes searching their faces as if to memorize them anew, as if afraid even now that looking away might let them slip from his grasp. Then his gaze found mine, dark and searing, carrying too many truths at once. I wanted to collapse, to weep, to scream, but my body betrayed me again. I went to him, my palms pressed against his chest, feeling the rapid, uneven rhythm of his heart beneath the blood-stained fabric, and for the first time I realized how close he had come to losing everything too. His hand caught the back of my neck, his forehead pressed to mine, his breath hot, uneven, trembling. "You almost died," he whispered, voice raw, breaking. "I almost lost you again." My throat tightened, my eyes burned, but no tears came. "And if I had," I murmured, "I would have died protecting you." Protecting them, because that's what love is, Nikolai. It destroys, and it saves, and it demands everything. His lips crushed mine before I could say more. Fierce, desperate, a kiss that carried the taste of smoke and blood and grief. I kissed him back with all the fury left inside me, pulling him closer until the world outside disappeared, until there was only this, 2 ruined souls clinging to each other in a house built of violence. He lifted me easily, carrying me across the room, laying me on the table where maps of war had once sprawled, scattering the remnants with a sweep of his arm. His hands tore at the fabric of my dress, his mouth devouring mine as though every second mattered, as though tomorrow was a promise neither of us could trust. I yielded to him, to the hunger, to the truth that our bodies had always spoken better than our words. He moved inside me with a rhythm born of desperation and devotion, each thrust a claim, each kiss an apology, each touch a vow. I clung to him, nails digging into his back, gasps breaking into cries that filled the room, my body answering his with the same hunger, the same need. It was not gentle. It was not soft. It was survival. It was salvation. It was the kind of love that burned brighter because it might be the last. When it ended, when we collapsed into one another, sweat mingling with blood and ash, He held me as though he could fuse me into his body, his whispers falling against my ear like promises carved into stone. "I will kill them all if they ever come close again," he said. "I will burn the world for you, for them, for us." I pressed my lips to his shoulder, my voice faint but steady. "Then burn it. But don't lose yourself in the fire, because if you do, we're already lost." He pulled me tighter, his breath shuddering against my neck, and for the first time I felt the truth settle inside me like a weight I could finally carry. We were bound not just by blood, not just by hate, not just by the children who bore our names, but by something far stronger. We were bound by love that refused to die, even when it should have. Love that would demand everything until the very end. The morning after was too quiet, the kind of silence that follows devastation, not peace. The fires had been extinguished, the blood scrubbed from the stone, but the air still carried the heaviness of what had been lost outside those walls. I rose from the bed with aching limbs, my body tender, not only from the ferocity of his touch, but from the weight of everything that had unfolded. The boys were already awake, sitting by the hearth, their eyes too watchful, too solemn. Misha met my gaze with the steel of someone who had seen too much, while Lev leaned against him, small hand curled into his brother's sleeve, seeking comfort in closeness. I went to them, gathering both into my arms, kissing their hair, breathing them in, promising silently that I would never let them become numb to tenderness, no matter how cruel the world around us remained. Behind me I felt his presence before I heard him, the slow tread of his boots across the floor, the shadow of his body cutting across the light. He didn't speak right away. He stood there watching us, his expression unreadable, his eyes heavy with something I couldn't name. When he finally did speak, his voice was low, certain, final. "It's over." I looked up at him, uncertain what he meant. His gaze held mine, unflinching. "The ones who came for us. They're gone. All of them. They won't return." The way he said it left no room for doubt. He had ended it in blood, and though I wanted to recoil from the truth of what he was, I couldn't, because I also knew he had done it for us, to carve a fragile space where we might breathe again. I rose, leaving the boys nestled together, and crossed to him. His face was harder in daylight, less a man, more a king, and yet when I touched his cheek, his eyes closed, his hand covering mine as if he needed that anchor to keep from unraveling. "You'll never be free of it," I whispered. "Neither will I, but maybe we can stop pretending we're meant to be." His eyes opened, searching mine with something rawer than I expected. "You're not meant to be free of me, Elena. You're meant to stand beside me. That's the only truth I've ever known." My chest tightened, torn between fury and surrender, between the years of pain and the undeniable pull of him. "And what about them?" I asked, my voice breaking as I nodded toward the boys. "Do they deserve this life?" His jaw clenched, his gaze flicking to the fire where they sat. He didn't look away from them when he answered. "They deserve everything. They deserve safety. They deserve strength. And they will have both, because they are mine, because they are ours." The certainty in his tone wrapped around me like chains, and like shelter all at once. I hated it. I needed it. I leaned into him, my forehead against his chest, my tears hot against his shirt, and his arms came around me, unyielding, unbreakable. He pressed his mouth to my hair, to my temple, to my lips, whispering my name with a tenderness that hollowed me out. The boys stirred then, their eyes on us, and Nikolai pulled back just enough to look at them. "Come here," he said softly, and though Misha hesitated, Lev rose first, crossing the room with hesitant steps until he was folded into his father's arm. Misha followed, slower, but when Nikolai reached for him too, he didn't resist. He gathered them both, one on each side, their small frames pressed against the breadth of, and for the first time I saw him not as the ruler of shadows, not as the man who had torn me apart, but as the father of my children. My heart broke and mended all at once. I joined them, wrapping my arms around all three, the four of us bound together in a circle of flesh and blood and scars. And in that moment, in that fragile space carved out of violence and ruin, I knew the truth. We would never escape this world. We would never live simple lives. But we would live, together, in the darkness, in the fire, in the love that refused to die. And maybe that was enough. Maybe that was everything. Years later, I still wake sometimes in the dark with the echo of gunfire in my ears, the taste of smoke on my tongue, my body remembering what it is to bleed, to run, to break. I rise from the bed quietly so as not to disturb him, slipping through the quiet halls where the fire burns low, letting the silence wrap around me like a cloak. The house is different now. The walls have been repaired, the gardens tended, but the ghosts remain, watching from the corners, whispering from the stone. I am no longer afraid of them. They remind me of what it cost to stand here, of what we lost, of what we refused to surrender. Sometimes I find myself standing at the balcony where I once watched the world below with a hollow chest, where I once believed I would never return. The air is cold against my skin, but when his arms come around me from behind, heat floods through me, steady and certain. He presses his mouth to the curve of my neck, his breath warm against me, his voice low, still carrying that rawness it always had when he spoke my name. "You should be sleeping," he murmurs. I lean back into him, my hands covering his, my eyes on the horizon where dawn begins to push its way through the dark. "So should you." His chest rumbles with quiet laughter, but he doesn't argue. His arms tighten, holding me as though even now, even after everything, he fears I might vanish again. I no longer remind him I won't. He knows it now. He had to nearly lose me twice to believe it, but he knows. Inside the house, the sound of footsteps breaks the quiet. Misha's voice, deeper now, still carrying the edge of childhood, but already shadowed with his father's gravity, calls for his brother. Lev answers with a laugh, lighter, softer, but steady, the kind of laugh that has always belonged to him, the kind that even war could not take away. I turn my head, smiling into the morning. They are taller now, no longer children, but not yet men, their faces caught between innocence and inheritance. They train in the yard under his watch, learning the weight of weapons, the sharpness of words, the rules of a world they did not choose. I worry sometimes that they will forget the softness I fought to give them, the nights of lullabies, the mornings of quiet embraces. But then I watch them together, protective of each other, bound not by fear, but by love, and I know they carry it still. Nikolai joins them sometimes, his voice stern, his presence unyielding, but his eyes betray him. He looks at them with reverence, with pride he does not speak, and when they are not looking, with a tenderness that still astonishes me. I wonder if they see it. I hope they do. At night, when the house is still, when the boys are asleep and the world holds its breath, he comes to me, not as the man the world fears, not as the king of shadows, but as the man who once broke me to save me, the man who wept into my skin as he held me bleeding, the man who has spent every day since trying to piece me back together. He loves me fiercely, desperately, sometimes so completely it frightens me. And I love him still, in the same dangerous way, with the same reckless devotion that once drove me to hate him. Our love has never been gentle. It has always been fire, always been hunger, always been pain and salvation in equal measure. But it is ours, and it endures. Tonight I will return to bed, slip beneath the sheets, curl against him as his arms come around me, as his breath steadies against my skin. Tomorrow will come with its demands, its dangers, its endless shadows. But for now, for this moment, I let myself breathe in the peace we carved from ruin, the family we built from ashes, the love that refused to die even when everything conspired to kill it. For now, I let myself believe in forever. Winter comes in soft, white breaths that hush the stones and crown the black iron with frost, and tonight the house glows from within, as if a heart were beating behind the walls, steady, luminous, alive. Guests drift through rooms that once held our ghosts. Candles pool along the stair. Violins draw a ribbon of sound that finds me at the balcony rail, where years ago I learned how to stand alone, and now I do not stand alone, because his palm settles at the small of my back, and heat moves through me like a vow, the simple gravity of his touch telling every watching eye what words no longer need to prove. Below us, Misha and Lev linger at the edge of the crowd, taller now, shoulders just beginning to carry the weight of men, one composed and observant, the other bright with a quiet joy that refuses to be dimmed, and when they see me they lift their chins the same way he does when he makes a promise. And for a breath, the music disappears, and I feel only the blessed, aching fullness of a life I thought I lost. He guides me down the stairs, not as a king leading a procession, but as a man leading his wife into light, and I feel the silk of my dress whisper across my scar, a silver line no one sees, and I do not hide, a seam that says we did not break. We were remade. He takes my hand before everyone, and for once there is no mask in his eyes, only the unguarded tenderness I learned to trust in the dark, and when he asks me to dance, the room opens, like a held breath released, our bodies finding the old language that existed before exile and after blood, the turning and the folding, the silent conversation of two souls who no longer pull away. He draws me close enough to feel the truth of his heartbeat and slips a ring beside the one I wear. A second circle, thinner, forged from a piece of iron salvaged the night I almost died, a quiet madness made into devotion, and he murmurs that he wanted something living to grow from what tried to end. Us, And I say yes without needing air, yes to the ring, yes to him, yes to the life we keep choosing. Later, when the music softens and the guests move like slow constellations, he leads me through a side corridor I have never noticed, to a small room lit by a single lamp, shelves lined with ledgers and maps, and between them, a narrow drawer that opens with a hidden catch. Inside is a packet, bound with red thread, edges worn, my name written in a hand that never trembles except when it touches me, and he tells me he wrote it the night he made me go, a letter he never sent because sending it would have killed me, but keeping it kept him alive, and he asks if I still want to read the truth. I lift the pages and the air changes, a tide turning inside my chest as I recognize the shape of his unsaid sorrow, the details I never demanded because the cost was too high, the routes he cleared, the guards he turned, the doctor he paid in silence, the casket prepared for a wife the world believed. Dead so I could be invisible enough to live, the order that the coffer remain unlocked and the cameras blind on the night I ran, mercy disguised as cruelty, love dressed in a language only war could understand. I do not read every line. I cannot, because grief and gratitude crest together, and I set the paper down and press my mouth to his knuckles until his fingers tremble around mine, until apology becomes breath, until forgiveness becomes bone. When we return, the boys are at the far doors, watching snow begin to fall, flakes drifting through the light like unhurried sparks, and Misha looks up at me with the question he no longer fears to ask, "Are we all right?" And I answer with my hands, smoothing hair that will not stay flat, with the press of a kiss to a brow that pretends it does not need it, with a glance that finds Lev's open smile and returns one of my own. We step out into the courtyard where the cold stings and laughter carries, where men who would die for us let themselves laugh because tonight they may, and he slips his coat from his shoulders to wrap it around me, though he knows I will give it back to the smallest of us within minutes, because that is the rhythm of our home. Protect, pass it on, protect again. Under the arch of thorned roses, our crest has changed, no longer a serpent alone, but a serpent circling a bloom with two small stars tucked at the base. And when I see it, I feel something unclench in my chest, a quiet recognition that we did not deny what we are. We taught it a gentler shape. The violin returns. Someone begins an old song, and he folds me into a second dance. Slower now, the kind that speaks in breath lengths and pauses, his mouth near my temple as he whispers that the borders are quiet and will stay that way, that he has set fire where fire was needed, and water where the earth begged to be cooled, that he has learned the difference and will keep learning because love has made him patient in ways power never could. I tell him I have learned, too, that I do not need to be rescued from darkness when I am the hand that holds the candle, and he laughs softly, the sound warm against my skin. The boys chase one another through snow that does not yet stick, and when they collide they rise with arms looped around shoulders, grinning like brothers who know their first oath, to each other before all else. I think of the letter, of the ring made from iron, of the nights when we kept breathing by counting heartbeats, and I understand that happiness is not the absence of danger. It is the presence of what we would die to protect. This hand, these eyes, those footsteps, this roof, the breath that finds my ear when everyone sleeps. Later, when the house empties and the fires sink to embers, he will lift me onto the wide stone of the hearth and kiss me like a man still amazed to be allowed to love, and I will answer like a woman who no longer hides her hunger because it was hunger that led her home. Before bed I walk the quiet halls and touch the frames where new portraits hang. No crowns, no thrones, just 4 figures in winter light, my scar a silver thread, his hand at my waist, 2 boys already leaning into tomorrow, and I whisper thank you into the stone, not to fate, not to mercy, but to the stubbornness that kept us choosing, and when I slip beneath the covers, he gathers me with a sigh that sounds like a door closing against wind. His mouth finds my shoulder. I turn into him, and in the hush before sleep I speak the only prayer I still believe. Let us keep what we have made of each other. He answers without words, palm warm over my heart, and outside the snow keeps falling, soft as forgiveness, relentless as love, the world unchanged, and yet, inside these walls, forever ours. Thank you, from the deepest part of my heart, for walking this journey with me until the very end. Every step of your presence has mattered more than I can say. Even the smallest gestures, a single comment, a simple heart, mean the world to me. What may feel like something small is, in truth, so powerful, because each like, each comment, and each share helps this channel grow, reach more people, and carry these stories of love farther into the world. If you are not yet subscribed, I warmly invite you to join now, so you can continue to listen and be part of the stories still to come.